Welcome to the Landscaping Podcast. My name is Joel Barnett and I am your host. And in today's episode, I'm talking with Chloe Foster from Foster Your Garden. And Chloe is a horticulturist, a teacher of horticulture, designer, writer, and also the host of the 3CR gardening show. So she's wearing plenty of hats, and that is because she loves the industry and started out in it straight out of school. So it was awesome to hear how she did that and was working at PGA Plants while she was studying. And I always knew that she wanted to be a teacher after she finished studying, and but got into that a lot sooner than she planned. She also talks about how great volunteering has been for her and how it's accelerated opportunities that she otherwise may not have had. And she got a dream job working at the Royal Botanic Gardens in Cranbourne. Also worked at the Melbourne Zoo, and I found that just absolutely fascinating hearing about that. She talks about how she was working in the butterfly enclosure, and yeah, as I said to her, I reckon the vast majority of people have got no idea about the work that's involved to just for the plants at somewhere like the zoo. Most people think it's all about the animals, but they've all got to eat something, and most of it's plants. So yeah, went for it. It's a little bit longer than the normal episode because I was absolutely fascinated with most of the things Chloe was talking about and absolutely loved talking to her. So hopefully you enjoy that episode as much as I did with Chloe Foster. Chloe, thank you for joining us on the Landscaping Podcast. My first question for you is, how did you start in the industry?
I like this question because it's such an open-ended question. I got my first job in horticulture 2 or 3 days after I finished my Year 12 exams. My friends, I had enrolled in a diploma of horticulture already, and my friend had got a job through like a local labour hire company at a production nursery around the corner from where we all lived. And she was, oh yeah, it's great. I just walked up and they gave me a job, and I was like, oh yeah, cool. And I thought, oh, that'll help. I'm gonna study horticulture anyway. I like gardening and didn't really know what else to do. So yeah, I called the labour hire agency and I said what I was about to start studying after school, and they went, oh yeah, well, we'll send you to PGA in Wonga Park, so Plant Growers Australia. And I rocked up there on my very first day, and I will never forget my boss, the lovely Steve Eggleton, said, oh, I just need to be a little bit more sun smart tomorrow. I was in my, because I thought, oh, I'm going to be in a nursery and we're getting really dirty and filthy. I'm not going to wear any good clothes. And I had on a singlet top and like my school sports shorts, which were fine. He's like, just wear a t-shirt tomorrow. I didn't really have any idea about OH&S or sun smart policies or anything. Anyway, he was so good to me for my entire time there. I worked there every summer that I was studying, and then in school holidays and in between classes and all that, I just took my timetable to him and I said, this is what I've got. And when I was at uni, all I could do was, like half Friday or something. He's like, yeah, cool, come in, no worries. So yeah, I started in the propagation department at PGA the summer before I started my diploma of horticulture at Swinburne in Wantirna, which unfortunately no longer delivers horticulture, which is a really big loss. But yeah, I had an absolute blast studying hort there. I got absolutely obsessed with plants, particularly the Australian flora. And I sort of discovered that I was really good at something. Not to toot my own trumpet, but I went to a private school, and I mean, I'm not a big studier. I wouldn't spend all my weekend reading over notes and studying and all that. I mean, I look back at now and I was pretty lucky. Like I got average grades without studying, or above average grades. I'm like, that's pretty good. I need to give myself a bit more credit. Then I went to TAFE sort of thinking I was a really average student, and I did really well. And that was really cool. So that gave me a lot of confidence. But I had the most amazing teachers. All of them were just wonderful and so passionate about the different parts of horticulture that they had experience in. And I had always been interested in teaching when I was at school. Went to a few open days when I was at school and got really intimidated by universities and their open days and all that. So TAFE was a fantastic option straight out. And it's just such a more low-key learning environment and hands-on and all the practical stuff that you do. And it was a really good decision. That was sort of like an instinct gut decision, and mum and dad were obviously supportive of whatever I wanted. So yeah, look, so lucky to have an amazing TAFE experience. And I thought, oh, I think I'll end up at TAFE one day teaching. Didn't quite know what my career might have looked like. I was into garden design, and that was about all I knew going into it. I thought, oh yeah, I'll probably end up teaching at TAFE one day, and when I'm really old and ready to retire or something. And that hasn't been the case, but yeah, it was just a really great environment, and my teachers, yeah, as I said, were fantastic. A couple of them particularly were really, really into Australian plants. And I see this pattern now in my teaching is a lot of people come in being interested in growing fruit and veggies, and then they start to learn what native plants are and what Indigenous plants are, and they just get obsessed like I did. I mean, it might be my brainwashing, but yeah, I just absolutely fascinated by the Australian flora. And so that's probably led my sort of research and career choices up till now. Now, since I've been teaching, I've had to rebroaden my plant knowledge so that I can cover that sort of stuff of some of the other standard exotic plants that we do see in horticulture and landscaping. But yeah, really lucky at when I studied TAFE and kept working at PGA all through, and then finished TAFE, which was the diploma back then was 2 years, and then decided to go to uni to keep studying Australian plants and to study botany essentially. So I did biological science at La Trobe Uni in Bundoora in Melbourne, and back to school, like wasn't getting super high marks like I was in TAFE, but also wasn't like spending every single ounce of my weekend studying. So I think I got through relatively unscathed through uni, but again, had some really lovely teachers that were passionate. And I never pursued the sort of career that the opportunities in my bioscience degree could have given me, academia or even working for the Department of Environment in whatever name that it's been given. But the bioscience has given me an amazing understanding of landscapes and plants and all that. So it's really been a great background to horticulture, and I've always just sort of stayed in horticulture.
What do you think it was when you were at school that made you want to get into, like, made you enroll for that diploma in horticulture? Because there's not a lot of people, I don't reckon, who go straight from school to start to do that.
There's not actually. And I think I was probably the only one in my TAFE class. And today I don't see it much either. I'd always liked gardening, and I honestly didn't know what else I wanted to do. I've been interested in teaching, but I saw how hard my particularly high school teachers worked, even when I was at school. And I was like, no, I did. I wish I had a better answer for you other than I just wasn't interested in anything else. Uni really, really intimidated me. I did consider landscape architecture at one point, but I went to one of the open days for that, and it was so busy. And I just remember really narrow hallways and, them sort of saying things like, oh, you need to be really creative to do well in this and blah, blah, blah. And I was like, oh gosh, like, I don't think I'm that creative. I like doing arts and craft. I just have always, I don't have an answer. And people have asked me this. I've just always been interested in gardening, and even talking to like my guidance counselor at school, and particularly going to a private school, they're putting all the university flyers in front of you and bachelor of this, bachelor of that, blah, blah, blah. And I had to be like, and what are the other options? Like, I've heard about this thing called TAFE. So I sort of had to push for that and really ask for that, because they, typical private school, which was a wonderful school. But yeah, they just love sending all their students off to tertiary education straight off. But I'm so glad I didn't, because I needed to leave school, realize that I was, pretty good at something, and then get the confidence up and then tackle uni, which was no mean feat. No mean feat doing any sort of degree, but a science degree is really full on. I'd escaped every science class at high school, and then all of a sudden I found myself doing like chemistry, genetics, like, oh gosh, it was full on, but I got through it. A P for a degree.
Yeah. Yeah, like I remember, I can't remember if it was myself or my sister learning about universities, and there was two different types of classes. There was lectures and there was something else. And they were saying like you have to go to a certain percentage of these lectures, but you don't have to go to all of them. And I
Yeah.
just thought, oh, that sounds like trouble. Like if you don't have to go to something, I'm not going. So
Yeah.
that is not the place for me.
Yeah.
I love how
Yeah.
you said that you were learning, like you got through school, like sound like you were good at it without having to try too hard. But then when you got to the TAFE and doing something you actually enjoy, you did it better even without doing all that extra study. So because it makes a lot of sense when you're learning about something you like, you're going to take more of it in.
Yeah. And it's for some people it's, easier too. I mean, it's easier enjoying anything if you're interested in it and if you're passionate about it. So yeah, it was a lot easier, and it just gave me a great foundation to get me into uni. And I'm so glad that I went. My HEC step won't tell you that, but yeah, I'm so glad I went to uni after TAFE. Yeah, very
And what was
lucky.
it you were studying at uni? Sorry.
Did a Bachelor of Biological
That's right.
Science.
Yep.
So obviously did all the botany subjects all the way through, and then which meant that I majored in botany, and the other sort of secondary subjects I did were geology. So again, the geology has given me a really good understanding of landscapes and sort of not necessarily soils, but sort of trends in landscapes and an understanding of plant distributions through landforms and weather patterns and all that too. One of my favourite subjects was this processes that shape the earth, I think it was called. And it was basically, a history, earth history really, how all the continents have moved. And as they've moved, that's changed weather and wind patterns. And, particularly with Australia, as we've moved northwards and separated from Gondwana, all that sort of stuff. And it has again like fed into my understanding of plants and connections and how plants are related or not related, which, again, as a bottom line, feeds into selecting the right plant for the right place in a garden, which at a really very, very small scale.
Yeah, but it does make a lot of sense though. It is like you say, it's a small scale, but everything has got a reason why it does well in a certain spot.
Yeah, yeah. And you can learn about plants to the nth degree, but yeah, the other stuff that I sort of have behind me has really helped play into understanding species and for horticulturally, like their cultivation requirements. So,
What did you do once you finished studying at uni there?
so I stayed at PGA for a little bit longer because I finished, yeah, you finish studying, and because I went straight from school to TAFE and uni, it's pretty daunting then going, well, like, what the F do I do next? So I stayed at PGA for a little while part time and got a job at our local retail nursery in North Ringwood called Branch Out Nursery, which is an absolutely fantastic little nursery. One of the things that's awesome about it is that it doesn't have a cafe, so it's all about the plants. Square meterage, it's tiny. So, and because it's in a really good location near Park Orchards and North Ringwood, which is a pretty wealthy area. So people like their gardens there. So they move through stock really quickly, which means the plants are really fresh. So I learned a lot. Retail nursery just gives you so many, or you have to troubleshoot on your feet. So you get clients and customers coming and going, oh, I've got my plant's dying. Why? And they may or may not bring a couple of photos in or some dead leaves or something. So I think it's a really good step after, or studying horticulture in general, but after studying at uni and at TAFE, retail was really helpful because you learn all this stuff, but the problem solving component of retail nurseries just helps connect those dots of what you know. And you learn a lot about the local area, and you start taking notice of weather patterns. And I had I remember I always had a customer come in. She'd had magnolia, one of her magnolia plants had tip burn on all the outside of the leaves. And a month or so earlier, we'd had a really heavy frost and sort of going, oh, so it's not just like the weather from the day before, it's like the weather from a few months ago. And some of those larger scale, like when you get a big plague soldier beetle outbreak, and it's usually because of a wet winter the last year before or a dry spring that from that, those sort of things. That's all from working in retail. And like particularly the pests and disease troubleshooting from there as well. So that really helped. And obviously you learn a lot about what's available in the market then too. So I had a few jobs at once for quite a while, and I was a bit non-committal. So I was at retail at Branch Out, and then I got a bit of a dream job at Karanga Native Nursery, which any Victorian Melbourne gardeners, it's one of the best nurseries in Australia, but it's probably the best Australian native nursery in Australia. The range is just absolutely huge. So I got a job there as well in those early days, and my knowledge of Australian plants just absolutely grew. And that has had a big influence on my plant selection. If I do like consults, like garden consults and small designs. I've always done that on the side. So yeah, from working at Karanga and, Banksia. Yeah, well, it's not just like Banksia spinulosa and marginata. There's Banksias that'll grow in shade, in wet spots that'll grow, or ones that'll grow in deserty sands and everything in between that spectrum. I learned all that at Karanga too. And that you might like a particular plant in a genus, but you've got a particular situation. It's like, well, there's actually probably going to be a species that'll fit in there. So yeah, that was massive. And a couple of people that I know have worked at Karanga since I was there have also picked up that plant knowledge too. So it's pretty special place to start or to head to for those that are into Australian plants.
And you were working at PGAs at the same time as well?
No, I'd left PGA by that point. I was there for about 7 years, sort of part-time. But when I started working in retail nursery, that's when I stopped working at PGA. So during the sort of retail nursery phase, I suppose you call it, and learning from encouragement from my university lecturers, they always encourage you to get involved in volunteering organisations. It's sort of, it's good for the soul, volunteering, but there's also a really strong component to career and experience as well, that was never been a main driver for me. Do just like helping out and giving back. And if someone wants me to help, then, bonus. So I got involved with, towards the end of uni, I think, the Royal Botanic Gardens Cranbourne had put out an ad for volunteer garden ambassadors, they called it, which came with we did like a 6-week training program, 1 day or half a day a week. And that they'd train you up, again, like training in Australian plants, which I was starting to get really, really into. And then training in like tour skills as well. So I jumped on that. I was the youngest by a mile. Everyone else was retired or nearing retirement and working part-time, wanting to find something to do. And he was this like 22-year-old, 21-year-old. And yeah, that was towards the end of uni. So it was really nice actually. When I was rostered on for those tour dates, we didn't often get a lot of tours. So I just like hang out with the other volunteer garden ambassador and we just wander around Cranbourne Gardens, which was still, they are still a young botanic garden. But yeah, they were very, very young 10 or so years ago, with stage 2 of the Australian garden hadn't opened at the early point when I first started. So yeah, I met some really special people through volunteering with that, which then led me into becoming involved with the Friends of Cranbourne Botanic Gardens. And again, being the youngest person, everyone is just like so excited to have you be involved, and the wealth of information that they're willing to share, these people that I was meeting. and not just about plants too, was very, very special. And I do treasure the Cranbourne friends particularly. There's sort of, again, that sort of opened me up to friends groups in general, these amazing volunteer organisations of just a group of people that are super passionate about something and are donating money or donating their time to support, a garden or a bushland area or whatever other else. There's a friends of group. There's probably friends of groups for historical buildings or something, I think. So it's a fantastic concept, friends groups. So I've sort of always had this like paid employment in horticulture and then this volunteer employment or volunteer jobs sitting alongside it, which is an interesting juggle, but I don't know, just sort of always done it. And I do remember, it was probably from my lecturers at uni encouraging getting involved in volunteer work in whatever form. And it has led to some absolutely incredible opportunities. I don't know whether it's like sped up career progression. I don't know. That just thought has come to my mind now, so I'm not sure. But yeah, it's definitely opened up some incredible opportunities, and I met some amazing people along the way, just from giving up a few hours on a Saturday or Sunday to hang out with people and chat plants. It's not
Yeah,
that hard.
like you took the words right out of my mouth. I was going to say is you would have got some amazing opportunities from it, and I would say it's impossible to know whether it's sped it up or not because it's sliding doors. You don't know if you didn't do it, but yeah, there's no like I don't think anyone who helps out with any doing any volunteering would regret it.
No, absolutely not. And from the Friends Committee involvement, I got to meet and have gotten to know Roger and Gwen Elliott really well. Roger's like my Yoda. I just love him to pieces. He's the best. And it was through them that I got involved with the 3CR gardening show. They're like, oh, you like to talk about plants? We've spoken to Pam, who hosts the show. Why don't you come along? So that was in my early days at Melbourne Zoo. Yeah, so I've been involved with 3CR gardening show for about 8 years now.
Oh, right.
Gosh, yeah,
So is that
yeah.
every Sunday?
No, thankfully, and I've always dug my heels in. So volunteer burnout is a big thing, and you do need to be careful in any volunteer organisation, to not burn out because you just want to give, and help and help and help, particularly in environmental friends groups. I can imagine, in most of them, just there's never any funding for anything. You're just like always scraping to help and support and run the events and make it bigger and better and, raise as much funds for whatever as you can. So I always dug my heels in to never do every single Sunday at 3CR. Pam Vardy, who hosted the show for 25 years, hosted it by herself every Sunday for 25 years.
Jeez.
Yeah, incredible effort, but I just no, that's where that's where I draw a line. So when Pam handed the reins over a few years ago, there's a few of us that have stood up and we're starting to, share that load a bit more and make it more of a group effort so that, because a lot of us have a lot of other stuff on too, because you just want to, avoid volunteer burnout and all the things that are associated with that sort of stuff.
Yeah, because you don't want to find yourself resenting it at the time as well.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly. And it can become a lot. Like there was a point when I was with the Friends of Cranbourne Gardens, I was still working at Karanga. But then job opportunity came up for a horticulturist position at Melbourne Zoo. So I jumped at that and I got that. But stayed on the Cranbourne Friends Committee for that time and for a number of years ongoing. But that was big. I'd come home from a full-time job and be on my emails, checking emails or organising workshops and everything for that. So that was a hard balance for a little bit there. And because you're younger, you sort of, and still pretty fresh out of uni and all that, you're still trying to find out what your boundaries are. Yeah, you want to do well and be involved and all that sort of thing. So I've that's been a real priority to try to balance in the last few years. is that volunteer work and paid work.
Mm.
It's always going to be like I'm on something wobbly. We'll get there.
So how was it working at the zoo? Because I know a fella who worked there, and he came out of landscaping and went to work there. And it sounded like it's so much cool stuff there because you're growing plants for koalas and giraffes, so specific for them, and all sorts of cool things like that.
Yeah, the zoo was it's one of my most special jobs. I worked because I had background in production nursery. And again, when you're sort of starting out, you don't really have a lot of transferable skills. So I sort of had looking at other jobs that I could have gone for, and they're like, must have experience in blah, blah, blah. And I didn't really have that. So I sort of stayed in nursery work for quite a while because that's what I had experience in. It wasn't where I wanted to end up in horticulture, and I still don't know where I want to end up, but I sort of had retail and production nursery experience. And then this job came up at the zoo, which was primarily in the nursery at Melbourne Zoo, growing, which I found out when I got there, was growing food plants for the butterfly house. So I was growing plants for caterpillars to eat. The amount of rethinking that I had to do for that to see a plant that had been eaten as a success was a big change in thinking, and it's had a huge influence in sort of my thinking ongoing, and what is successful in our gardens. In the last 5 or so to 10 years, habitat and providing a home for animals has really incorporated that conservation component. Has started to really incorporate itself into horticulture and gardening. Yeah, so growing all these weird tropical plants, mostly natives, because Australia has really strict quarantine measures. They were all Australian butterflies that are in the butterfly house at Melbourne Zoo, but we're breeding them down in Melbourne, and we're trying to grow the plants down in Melbourne, in temperate Melbourne during winter, in glass houses. So it was a really big challenge. We couldn't just buy fresh plants in every week or every month. One, because the plants that were growing weren't easily attainable from retail nurseries. If we had to get new stock, it was usually from a local tropical nursery up in far north Queensland, and budget wouldn't allow for it either. So the nursery, I'll talk about this for a moment. The nursery was set up in this sort of weird loop. The plants would come back down from the butterfly house having been completely smashed by caterpillars. We'd clean them up, get rid of all the caterpillar poo, put some fresh potting mix in it, give them a feed, put them back into the greenhouse to start growing again, and do a number of measures along the way, depending on what that species of plant needed. And then that plant would sort of cycle through. It would get a bit of greenhouse time. It would get fertilized, pruned, trained if it was a climber, sprayed with some really low grade, eco oil, because that's all we could use because of who we're growing plants for. We relied heavily on biological controls, so predatory mites and wasps and what are they, ladybirds that eat mealybugs and all that sort of thing. So we relied heavily on that. So they go through this process of growing in the glass house for a little while, getting sprayed. They'd be withheld for a couple of weeks. They might get shifted outside to harden off, and then they'd get put into another greenhouse, which was like a supermarket, that the butterfly house invertebrate keepers would come and get whatever they needed, take them back up to the butterfly house. They'd get smashed, and then they'd come back down again, and then just continue that loop. So yeah, I mean, that was just, it was crazy, and they're still doing that. I'm still in touch with a couple of people that I worked with there, and there's been a lot of improvements. It was another thing sort of along the way that was happening with my work is my body wasn't holding up, particularly in nursery work, and it was really challenging at the zoo because we're moving plants in pots around all the time, and they were plants in big pots, which was a really high manual handling risk. So at that point in time, we were there were projects going on all the time in the nursery to improve stuff, and since I'd left, the manual handling risk has decreased significantly there, which is fantastic. But yeah, I mean, I was sort of always struggled in nursery work from that physicality point of view because it's really repetitive on your body. But still, the zoo was fantastic. So I was in the nursery most of the time, and then one day a week I get to work with one of the other landscape gardeners. So be brush cutting in the gorilla enclosure, and there'd be, oh gosh, I never forget. I was brush cutting, earmuffs on, and the gorillas were in their night dens while me and the other horticulturists were in there doing some work in the exhibit. And the gorillas were like banging on the door, and I could hear it through my earmuffs, brush cutter, and just banging, wanting to get out. Yeah, and just getting to go in the exhibits and care for all the plants in there. It's some really unique type of horticulture. There's a big zoological horticulture association in the US. So not as horticulture isn't as thought of or as big. Zoological horticulture, sorry, isn't as thought of or as big in Australia, but it's plays such a vital role because otherwise these animals would be still living in concrete cells, which is what they were at Melbourne Zoo for quite a long time until the 90s when they had a strategic plan done and they started to change everything around and turn the zoo into what it is today, which is sort of these like mini examples of what that animal would have naturally lived in with the plants and growing, the plants that sort of suit that aesthetic or even are from the area that the animal is from. Like the meerkat enclosure at the zoo, which is fantastic because you can actually get in there and be in there with the animals. There's all these really advanced aloes through there, and you see, sorry, not the meerkats, the lemurs. And you see a lemur sitting on top of an aloe and sort of squashing it and flattening it. And then as a horticulturist, you're like, get off my bloody plants. And the damage that they do. So there's another added challenge to keeping your plants alive from that. And similar to the lemur enclosure, the butterfly house is one of the other exhibits where you can actually get in there with the animals. And those two are probably, when I was there, they'd constantly come up as people's favourite exhibits. And it was usually because of the reasons people are actually in there with it. I mean, you can't get into the gorilla enclosure. You can't get into the orangutan enclosure, but you can with a couple of non-threatening animals.
Yeah. I find that absolutely fascinating because I've been landscaping 20 years and had never thought, like, been to the zoo a lot, been members, like when we took our kids every month or so. And I'd never thought of the amount of work that goes into it like that. Like specifically, I suppose the butterfly enclosure gets a lot more, a lot more hard work in that. But yeah, most like 0.1% of the people who go through there would possibly think about that. But yeah, most people don't even consider it.
Yeah, and that's probably like the beauty in the job that they do there is that, and that's part of the magic, is that you don't really consider it. I mean, it is unfortunate in that I think, the hort team at the zoo should be equally celebrated as much as all the zookeepers do, but they aren't because of the job that they do. It just helps everything sort of blend into one.
It'd be one of those things that they would get noticed if they weren't doing their job properly. Like if all these plants are dead in the enclosure, then they start noticing it.
Yeah. And I think last time I was at the zoo, I think probably one of the last areas that will probably be renovated is the Australian bush zone in the zoo. And I mean, I'm not giving away any information because I don't know if that's going to happen or not, but a lot of the other zones in the last 20 years have been redone. So I think the Australian bush one does need to be redone. And again, it's because the plants aren't thriving in there. And yeah, if it was looking bad, then you'd know about it. But when it's not, and what do they call it? The wild seas, where you can see all the seals and the penguins and all that, sort of in the centre of the zoo. That was always one of my favourites. So that's all surrounded by Australian coastal flora. You walk through the Asian section go into where the elephants are, and you're surrounded by bamboo and a whole heap of other sort of plants that come from that area. And yeah, if those gardens weren't doing well, then that's when you'd be like, who is supposed to be looking after this? So yeah, they deserve, the team at in Hort at the zoo deserve a really big pat on the back because I know they work really, really hard.
Yeah. How long ago was it you left there?
probably about 7 years ago, I think. So a bit of a dream job came up at the Royal Botanic Gardens in Cranbourne. So again, Australian plants, growing them, cultivating them. So I was fully in the nursery, growing plant species from cuttings or seeds at Cranbourne. So that was, I cannot believe I was so stoked to get that job. I was like, oh my God, like I'm a horticulturalist at the Royal Botanic Gardens. I've peaked and I'm nowhere near the end of my career. What the hell?
Did you go
Um,
on like field trips to get seeds and cuttings as well?
yeah, they were just starting to ramp that up again at Cranbourne when I started, and that was from a couple of, or one main horticulturalist, Russell Lark, who's still there and is the curator of hort there. And one of my former colleagues from Karanga, we both started at Cranbourne at the same time, Matt Henderson. We were just like crazy plant nerds and wanted any excuse just to jump in the car and go up bush. So when I was there, we did a trip up to the Grampians and just spent the whole weekend collecting plants and pressing them as well. So that component of botany came in really, really handy at the gardens because because you're not allowed to collect plant material from a national park. Part of the permit for the gardens to collect plant material from the Grampians or any national park for that matter is that you are collecting it for scientific purposes. So you collect a living specimen so that you can grow that for the living collections, which is all the gardens in the Botanic Gardens. And you collect another representative specimen to be pressed and dried for the collections in the herbarium, all the dried specimens. So we were like collecting plants, identifying plants, and then pressing them as well. Like I was just in my absolute element. It was awesome. And then getting to grow all the really weird and wonderful Australian plants. Some of them have some really unique triggers and things you have to do to them to get them to propagate them, whether it's, smoke water or a blowtorch on a Banksia cone to get the follicles to open up. Yeah, getting to blowtorch stuff was like, that was probably the best. Yeah, so I was in the nursery there. So I still was in this, still in this nursery thing, but I was like, that's okay. I'm at the gardens. Like I'm here. I'm in. I had a foot in. You can sort of make your way. Once you get into an organization, sometimes you can just sort of make your way through it.
Did you get that job by anything to do with being part of the Friends group?
They knew me, but I still had to go through the whole bloody recruitment process and do it properly and all that. I did know at that point at the Botanic Gardens, a big component in them hiring new horticultural staff was that they had public gardens experience. So my zoo experience really helped with that. And being involved with the Friends group was a different kind of experience in public gardens. So it definitely helped, but I really had to back myself to go for that job again, because it's like when you start in horticulture, everyone just sort of thinks, or like, it's like, well, the Botanic Gardens, that's just like the be all and end all. And I worked so hard across those 10 years or whatever to get to the Botanic Gardens. But without to turn this to a complete downside, like my body did not hold up doing this nursery work. My back was not holding up at all. So my manager there, John Arnott, who's a really good friend to this day, he said, you just need to take some time off. So I took some time off to like rest and get my body up to scratch. And thankfully, I sort of went into it going, oh, like people have back issues and you have them forever, you can't fix them. Thankfully, I was lucky to find the treatments that worked for me and I fixed my back up. But in the process, there were a few epiphanies and light bulb moments. And I thought, what am I doing? Like absolutely ruining my body. I want to use my brain more. And I'd always in the background is this like wanting to teach, wanting to educate. And I thought, well, what am I waiting for? It was a bit weird because I was like, worked so hard to get Botanic Gardens and was like, this is where all good horticulturalists should end up. And going into that time off to fix my back, I was like, I'm an elite horticulturalist. I'm going to treat myself like an elite athlete and fix myself up and get back into work. But during that time, I had a friend that was working as a trainer, like a workplace trainer. And the organisation was a private organisation that she worked for, was starting to teach horticulture to what was it like? It was like VCAL. So you can do your VCE or you can do VCAL.
Yeah.
So doing a certificate 2 in horticulture for VCAL students that had ADHD and learning disabilities. So she was like, "I've got a job," and I was like, "Oh, wow." I mean, it was almost like an opportunity that I couldn't say no to. I had always wanted. And throughout all these other jobs that I was been rattling on about that I really, really loved, felt really restless for a lot through in them. And teaching has just always still been calling to me and just like floating around back here or something. So yeah, I had my time off. I fixed myself up. I went back to the gardens and I said, and I handed in my resignation, and I got this job teaching certificate 2 horticulture.
How long did you get to be at the gardens for?
About a year.
All
Yeah,
right.
just on. Yeah, which wasn't long.
You just sort of
Um,
just get to know the place in that time.
yeah, I got in there. I saw how they did it, and I was like, okay, cool, done. No, yeah, it wasn't that long, but it was the experiences there were absolutely invaluable, and I learnt how botanic gardens work and operate from the nursery perspective, and yeah, just from the whole thing, and even being involved with the friends group. I was still involved with the friends group then as well. But yeah, I just had this teaching things calling me, and my body wasn't holding up. But I fixed my body up, but then sort of mentally I fixed myself up too. I was like, no, I am capable of doing stuff where it's not just my body, I can use my brain as well. And I'd always thought, no, I can't do teaching it, can't teach it, don't know enough, need to know more, got to know everything before I do it. And I was like, that's just such a crock.
Especially because no one will ever know everything in
I
horticulture.
know I will strive for it, but I will, you will never get there. And I think that's really important to always have in the back of your mind that you will never know anything.
Mm.
And I see it with students that come through, they think they know everything and they're the worst students. Yeah, so I did my certificate 4 in training and assessment, they call it, which if anyone ever wants to teach, that's the qualification that you need to have. And got a job teaching certificate 2 to these young kids with learning disabilities. So I was in the workplace with them. So I was at about 3 or 4 different workplaces, and then we'd be back in a training room, and I'd be doing the classroom stuff with them, sort of this sort of highly adjusted, supported classroom experience, so that these guys could get a qualification and be qualified and get them, like workplace ready. It was a really fantastic program to give these kids an opportunity to get qualified properly and have them be, willing and able to, work and have a really good life. And they were awesome, these kids. And you don't think I'm teaching kids with disabilities. They were just normal young people. One group in particular was a group of these like raucous boys, and they were almost the death of me when we first started, but I ended up loving them so much. They were so full of energy. And that program, so we did a few of the different programs. So I was like a workplace on location trainer. So the training organisation I worked with, we had a program with Springvale Cemetery. So again, my public gardens experience came in handy there. And then we had a program with the City of Greater Dandenong too. So I got to know like their hort staff, and they were one of the most wonderful group of people, the hort and conservation team at Dandenong, who just ran the most fantastic program for these guys. They organised all the different mowers to come in, and pruning, pest control, weed control, and all the different things, components and practical experience that we could give to those kids. And yeah, just would, be out there with them, watching them work, teaching them how to do stuff, and, fine tuning their skills. And then we'd be back in the classroom doing work. So I did that for a couple of years. And then a job came up at Melbourne Polytech in Fairfield. Actually, that was just as the pandemic hit. So the programs for those Cert 2 were starting to wane. It's because I don't quite know why, but my sort of feeling was that COVID, everyone was freaked out, and it was sort of like, anything that's unnecessary can sort of wind up, and that's what it sort of felt like. And yeah, Melbourne Polytech were looking for teachers, and I got a job there, and I have been there ever since. It's a wild ride working in TAFE.
Yeah. Yeah. So what are you teaching there?
So we teach from Cert 2 in Hort up to diploma. I haven't taught Cert 2 there for a while, so I mainly teach units in Cert 3, 4 and diploma of horticulture. It's a big job. There's a lot of people management involved, new groups of students coming through every semester and working out how they all work and interact with each other. So doing that whole, the whole classroom management sort of side of things. And then still getting to do my horticulture and getting to do that hands-on stuff as well. But just, yeah, not as much on the body. It fries my brain instead of frying my body, teaching and managing people and working out. It's been fantastic actually teaching, because it's helped me work out and explain the basics of everything that we do. It's like, well, why do we do it? What's the process for this? And it's really helped to break down and explain those things, which has fed into, my radio and how I do that and just how you communicate, really.
And you've been involved with the garden show through that as well? With
Yeah,
the student
yeah. So
gardens?
yeah, the 3CR gardening show has always been there and will be for the foreseeable future. I just love it. I love being involved. It's been on air for about 40 years. Yeah. So I feel like I'm just a holder of a legacy until, I get too old and pass it on. It's a very, very special show, and the panelists that are involved in it, I have learnt, again, like I've obviously learned a lot about Australian flora, but then what I've been learning from the other panelists about some of the weird exotic stuff over the last few years has just been so cool, and it's so interesting hearing them talk about something that they're passionate about. It's
Yeah, there've
good.
been I've seen a few past guests have been on, like Stephen Wells was on there an episode, and Emmeline Bowman's been on a few times, and Chloe
Yeah.
Thompson just hosted her first episode.
Yeah. Chloe's just jumped on the hosting team with us. So her and I were on, she hosted just recently and she absolutely nailed it. It was natural. She did so much better than what I did with my first solo hosting show. She pushed all the right buttons and put the show on air. And yeah, Emmeline's involved too, and her knowledge just blows me away. Stephen Wells, my gosh, he's just so kind and so knowledgeable and passionate. Yeah, a Holly Boom, Stephen Ryan, with his crazy plant knowledge. Oh, they're just awesome people. And I love like what you and I are doing at the moment, but you just get to sit down and for an hour, almost 2 hours, just like chat about plants. And someone puts a microphone in front of you. It's great.
Yeah, that's what some people freak out about coming on the podcast. I think, I don't know how I'm going to go, but it's literally just two people talking about something they love.
Yeah, I was a bit nervous today because usually I'm doing the interviewing. So it's been totally fine. I've just waffled on.
Yeah, Chloe did say that would happen.
Thanks.
I saw you you had some involvement with Nadia's garden at the garden show this year. So what was that involvement?
That was really special. So that was sort of my Australian plant knowledge, and where my uni stuff came in. Nadia, her and I sort of been industry friends for a few years, and she just wanted some help with literally like the plants. The theme that she was going with was this Tasmanian alpine wilderness garden, which I was so excited by that concept to do a show garden at the Flower and Garden Show that is about a vegetation class and Indigenous plants. I was like, yes, this is great. And then to see what Phil Withers and Emmeline did at the show this year too was absolutely amazing for Australian plants. But yeah, Nadia just wanted my plant brain, which was so cool. I worked with her on the plant selection and sort of the aesthetics. So to try to get that look, well, what plants does she want, and the combat, like how to make the garden look like a Tassie alpine wilderness. So like, how do we arrange the plants in the ways that we do? So she had Tasmanian mountain pepper, a new coria, a new chocolate leaf coria. So all the different colours and indigenous plants, but to get the aesthetic of it too. So a few different times we sort of sat down and had a look at the plant list. There was a couple that were both like, oh yeah, I can see why you'd put that in there, but maybe there's another plant that sort of gives you that same look or the same shape, but it's more appropriate for this particular type of vegetation that you want to do. And then yeah, so I sort of worked on her in more so the design, plant selection phase. And then when the garden was being constructed too, I was there just a little bit helping her with the arrangement of a couple of the eucalypts, the trees that she had there. But yeah, she did an amazing job. It was, I mean, she's sort of the girls that work with her are fantastic, but females in the industry, she's a one-woman show and does some pretty amazing work. The landscapes that they create are just, I've been a big fan of them for quite a while. So it was
Yeah.
very special to work with her.
Yeah, it'd be so much more complex as well doing a garden like that, like a garden where you're replicating something rather than like the one I did the year before where I'm just designing a garden that I want how I want it to look. Whereas
Yep.
she's trying to replicate something how it would actually exist. So
Yep.
yeah,
Yeah,
more
and a big
complex.
challenge. And to get the plants for that was really challenging, like the
Yeah.
sourcing of the plants. The eucalypts came over from Tasmania. We sort of thought, okay, well, yeah, there's leptosperm tea trees that grow there, all these different grasses and sedges and all that. But to A, yeah, source them, or B, find something that looks similar, but still falls within that. Because with the judging, I think one of the judging criteria is actually, you might know, is you've said it's a Tassie alpine area, but there was a couple of things she had in the early days, and a kangaroo paw did escape in the final garden. But it's like being true to what you're saying it is. Whereas if it was just a regular garden that was, had a different type of design brief, then those components probably weren't as important.
Yeah.
Um,
That's the weird
but
thing
yeah,
is you make your own design brief so you can make it but then you got to meet it as well.
but yeah, you've got to follow it.
Yeah.
Yeah, that was the first time. I've obviously been going to MIFGS every year since I was really little. That was the first time this year that I've been involved in the show gardens. So another big learning curve. Very special to be involved there, and because I know Emmeline pretty well, just to see how she did it and what she did was also absolutely incredible. So go those girls, go the
Yeah.
girls.
Yeah, that her Emmeline's first the boutique garden that she did, I came second to her that year.
Oh,
So
did
yeah,
you?
we were right next to each other as well. So I've known him since then.
Yeah, yeah.
But did you not go there to get involved with the student gardens at all when Melbourne Polytechnic's in the students?
I haven't had a lot of direct impact or involvement, sorry, with our student gardens. I've been more involved so it's been the last couple of years, they've had a career hub at the Flower and Garden Show where a lot of the institutes sort of have a marquee. And so I've been more involved in the career hub to promote the courses and talk about horticulture in general. But the students that have competed, I've had a couple of them for subjects, and to see them put so much work into those gardens and thrive and do very, very well, it's a great kickstart for a business for them.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And you're doing writing as well, or are you still doing that? Because I saw you
Yeah,
had some articles in Gardening Australia magazine.
I've been writing for Gardening Australia magazine for just over a year now, the odd article, which another massive treat. Like I thought I peaked when I got to the Botanic Gardens. But to have to write articles for Gardening Australia magazine has just been, I just never thought that would be possible. And one of the most recent ones I did was on a plant called Lambertia formosa. To to feature that, it's a pretty unknown Australian plant, and to feature that in such a big magazine and really start to get some of those more unknown Australian plants out there and get those customers wanting them to force the growers to start growing them is a nice little thing that I think I can sort of try to influence. So yeah, very
Yeah, that's the
special.
hard thing because the plants take a while to grow, and they've got like to grow massive numbers that they can actually be
Mm.
productive and sell to people. And the growers kind of need to think of that before, like, yeah, they've got to start it almost.
Yeah, yeah. And it's interesting that sort of supply and demand with nursery plants because I take students to Plant Mark so they can see the huge range of plants that are on the market for horticulturalists and landscapers. But I also make sure I take them to the smaller boutique one-man show nurseries too, so that they can see it's a completely different suite of plants, some with more unusual, that these smaller nurseries are growing of really unusual plants. And always try to get them thinking, it's like we could just keep going back to that large scale stuff that I was growing at PGA and that all the pre-production nurseries grow. But again, working with Nadia on the show garden with Indigenous plants and what Emmeline Bowman does with her Indigenous landscapes as well, is trying to bring some of that more local flora and importance of local flora into gardens, but also to, I don't know how, but to get, the production nurseries to be growing some of this more unique stuff so that we still have a huge range of plants for our landscapes. It's a
Yeah.
bit of a job though.
Yeah, it's about educating people about them, like what you're doing with that magazine article, and yeah, just getting people to know about them. Because I spoke to Michaela Hamilton on a project that we're working with Phil Withers on because is also a native plant nut,
Yeah.
and she was telling me about some plants, and I had no idea that existed. And they just sound amazing. They're just like the perfect plant, but you don't know they exist.
Yeah.
And then
Yeah.
when you do know, you can't get them from anywhere.
Yeah. That was like at Karanga quite a lot because they have obviously a huge range of all the standard Australian plants that are in production nurseries, but then also Karanga grows a large proportion of their own plants. And it's great if you only want one or two for the garden, but to try to get some of these species into landscapes and landscaping, you need to be able to propagate them in big numbers. And for some of them, like, yeah, whatever Michaela was saying is like, this is the perfect plant for this space, like wet soil, full shade, or whatever it is. There is a perfect plant for that spot. But sometimes, yeah, it's just, you just can't grow it, enough of it for whatever, for whatever reason, because the big nurseries don't grow it. And then because the big nurseries don't grow it in the big numbers, well, then it doesn't make its way into bigger horticulture jobs and the big sort of landscaping jobs.
Hmm.
But that's a challenge.
Yeah, cart before the horse, I don't think.
Yeah. Yeah.
So where do you see yourself going in the future? Like, you're going to be teaching for as long as you can?
Yeah, I'm going to be teaching for a lot longer. It's given me, because of the way that it works with the term breaks and all that, it's sort of given me a bit more flexibility to do that writing, which I really love doing. I actually don't know. I've been thinking about it a lot lately. I don't know what the next steps are after teaching, whether or not I stay in teaching or whether I move into industry. That's a really great area at the moment, and I'm actually okay with that being an unknown because some amazing opportunities have already come up for me. So I just figure that keep talking to people about plants, and yeah, who knows what else will come up. I'm a bit of a control freak, but not so much about some stuff or
Yeah.
for this.
Yeah, well,
So
the amount of contacts you've made over the years, whatever you choose to do, you'll know someone who can help you get there.
yeah, absolutely. Yeah. And I think that just comes from willingness to share knowledge and talk about and chat about plants and try to help people out as much as I can and maybe a bit of good karma and that, yeah, that comes back to me too.
Absolutely. And
Yeah.
last question for you, Chloe, who do you think would be a good guest to have on the podcast?
I've got a list for
Oh,
you.
awesome.
Look, Vivi Scapari is a wonderful local gardener and landscape designer. AB Bishop would be a very interesting chat. She's now obviously the books that she's written, but yeah, she's the horticulture editor of Gardening Australia magazine. And Andrea Proctor, I don't think you've interviewed her. They're
No.
my top three. I can give you a bit more of a list if you want to.
Yeah, go. Where's Andrew from?
Andrew's in Melbourne. She does a lot of work with Botanic Gardens, so a lot of landscape, the design work with Andrew Laidlaw at Melbourne Botanic Gardens, but a lot of the regional Botanic Gardens, she works with them on their master plans and designing, her and her team designing areas, new garden beds. They've just done the big new fernery that opened at Ballarat or Bendigo Botanic Gardens. Yeah, she's absolutely wonderful and does some really, really cool projects.
Yep. And you've got more on your list?
Yeah, do you want me to keep going?
Yeah, because
I don't think have you interviewed Nadia Cole yet?
yes, I already have
All
heard
right,
of one.
so you got Nadia, Loretta Childs, landscape designer in Melbourne. She's been sort of a lifelong gardener, lifelong designer. Has never one of those people that's never had to advertise much. She's so good. It's just word of mouth. Loretta's wonderful. So she's part of the 3CR team too.
Yep.
And the other person on my list, a bit of a left of centre one, is Jane Tonkin. So Jane's another 3CR person and runs Tonkin's Bulbs and Perennials, which she sort of inherited from her father. So like she grows the weirdest stuff. She talks about plants and like species forms of daffodils, all the different cyclamens, species forms of epimediums, all these new plants that I've been learning about in the last few years from just chatting to Jane and some other people. So Jane's just in the Dandenongs and grows bulbs and unusual plants. Her partner grows Australian orchids and is involved with the Australian naked Australian native. She's gonna love that. Australian Native Orchid Society. So they're a bit of a power duo, those two. So there's plenty of people for you to chat to.
Yeah, it's funny. There, I don't know if it was maybe 40 or 50 episodes in. There were some people saying, "Oh, you must be starting to run out of people to get on the podcast." I was like, not quite. There's
Yeah,
a couple
not
more to
quite.
go.
Yeah, there's
And
still
then like, and you've mentioned people like I know out of the six I've heard of a couple because of seeing their names on the 3CR, but yeah, that's all I know about them. So there's 5 new people I've learned about.
yeah,
So
yeah, yeah.
yeah,
And haven't you just crossed over about 200 episodes or something?
yeah. This yours will be 201.
All
So
right, cool. Oh,
yeah,
that's heaps. And I think, as I said to you the other day, like I've I've recommended because students just want to know your career path to the T because that's like, okay, so that's a known for them and they can try to follow it or something like that. So I have flicked them some episodes and said, just go listen to the landscaping podcast because every single episode, everyone's journey is completely different and that's okay and
yeah.
interesting.
And
Yeah.
yeah, it is that I love it because some people like you go into it straight out of school. Other people go and work in corporate and then start it when they're 35 or 40 and,
Yeah.
and all successful people. So like you say, there's no one path to get there. Just get there however you want to
Yeah. Yeah.
and whatever
Absolutely.
works.
Yeah. Whatever works. And just follow what you want to, what you're interested in, what you want to do.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, absolutely loved having this chat with you, Chloe. Can't thank you enough for coming on. Like, because Chloe Thompson said that yeah, you're passionate about what you do, and that's quite clear. And that's my favorite thing about doing the podcast is talking to people who love it. So thank you so
Yeah.
much for coming on.
Thank you so much for letting me waffle on and, yeah, indulge in it. I really appreciate it. Thank you.